The blizzard swept through Wyoming Territory with a fury that seemed intent on wiping every living thing from the face of the earth. And the woman stumbling through the knee-deep snow knew she had perhaps an hour left before she became just another frozen corpse the spring thaw would reveal. Her name was Annabel Kensington, and 3 days ago she had watched her husband's wagon train companions rob him blind before putting a bullet in his chest and leaving her stranded in the wilderness without horse, supplies, or hope. She could no longer feel her feet inside her worn leather boots. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and the shawl wrapped around her head did little to keep out the biting wind that felt like 1,000 tiny knives slicing through her skin. The landscape stretched endlessly white in every direction, and she had lost all sense of where she was going. She simply kept moving because stopping meant dying, and despite everything that had happened, some stubborn part of her refused to give up. Then, through the swirling snow, she saw it. A faint yellow glow that might have been her oxygen-starved brain playing tricks on her, but she staggered toward it anyway. The light grew stronger, and she realized it was a window, a cabin. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as nothing more than a whisper lost in the howling wind. Annabel reached the door and pounded on it with what little strength remained in her frozen hands. The sound was pathetically weak, barely audible even to her own ears. She tried again, and this time managed a slightly louder thump before her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed against the door, her vision going dark at the edges. The door opened suddenly, and she fell backward into warmth. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor, and she found herself looking up into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man with dark hair and several days of stubble on his jaw, and he was looking at her with an expression of pure shock. "Good God," he said, and his voice sounded far away, as if she were hearing it from the bottom of a well. "How long have you been out there?" Annabel tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering so violently that no coherent words would form. The man kicked the door shut behind her and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. He carried her across the room to a fireplace where flames crackled warmly, and set her down in a chair close enough to feel the heat, but not so close as to cause harm. "We need to warm you up slowly," he said, already moving around the cabin with purpose. "Too fast and you will lose fingers and toes. Can you tell me your name?" Annabel," she managed through chattering teeth. "Annabel Kensington." "I am Ethan Zimmerman," he said, returning with several blankets that smelled of wood smoke and soap. He wrapped them around her carefully, then knelt in front of her and began unlacing her boots with gentle hands. "This is going to hurt something awful when the feeling comes back, but it has to be done." He was right. As her feet began to thaw, the pain was excruciating. Annabel bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, but tears streamed down her face anyway. Ethan worked methodically, rubbing her feet through thick wool socks he had replaced her wet ones with, keeping up a steady stream of quiet reassurance. "You are doing fine. Just breathe through it. The pain means your feet are coming back, which is good. Just a little longer now." When he moved on to her hands, the process was just as agonizing. Annabel focused on his face to distract herself from the pain. He had strong features, weathered by sun and wind in a way that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible but definitely there. She guessed he was somewhere in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. "How did you end up out there?" Ethan asked as he worked. "The nearest settlement is 15 miles south, and this storm has been building for 2 days. No one in their right mind would be traveling in this weather." Annabel closed her eyes, the memory of those last horrible moments flooding back. "My husband and I were traveling west from Missouri. We joined up with a group outside Cheyenne. 3 days ago they turned on us, killed Samuel for the money he carried, left me with nothing." Ethan's hand stilled for a moment, and when she opened her eyes, she saw anger flash across his face. "They just left you out there to die. They took the horses, the wagon, everything. I have been walking ever since." Her voice broke on the last word. "I did not even get to bury him. I just had to leave him there in the snow." "I am sorry," Ethan said quietly, and there was such genuine compassion in his voice that Annabel felt something crack open inside her chest. She had been so focused on survival that she had not allowed herself to truly feel the loss yet. Now, in the warmth and safety of this cabin, with this stranger showing her more kindness than those she had trusted with her life, the grief hit her like a physical blow. She sobbed, great heaving cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Ethan did not try to stop her or tell her everything would be fine. He simply stayed there, holding her hands in his warm ones, letting her cry until she had no tears left. When the storm finally passed, Annabel had been asleep for nearly 18 hours. She woke to find herself in a real bed, covered with so many blankets she could barely move. The cabin was filled with bright sunlight streaming through the windows, and she could hear someone moving around in another part of the house. She sat up carefully, taking stock of herself. Her feet and hands ached, but the pain was manageable. She wiggled her fingers and toes experimentally, relieved to find everything still worked. Someone had changed her out of her wet, ruined clothes and into a soft flannel nightshirt that was far too large for her. The thought of Ethan undressing her while she slept should have embarrassed her, but she found she was simply grateful to be alive. The door opened, and Ethan appeared carrying a tray. He smiled when he saw she was awake, and Annabel was struck by how the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said, setting the tray across her lap. "I made stew, nothing fancy, but it will stick to your ribs." The smell made Annabel's stomach growl loudly, and she realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten. She picked up the spoon and took a bite, then another, then found herself eating with an urgency that bordered on desperation. Ethan watched her with amusement. "Slow down, or you will make yourself sick. The food is not going anywhere, I promise." Annabel forced herself to eat more slowly, though it took considerable willpower. Between bites, she looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was larger than she had initially thought, with separate areas for sleeping, cooking, and living. Everything was clean and well-maintained, with a woman's touch notably absent. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches, nothing but functional furniture and supplies. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I do. Have for the past 3 years since I finished building the place." Ethan sat down in a chair near the bed, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "I run cattle in the summer, trap in the winter. It is not much, but it is honest work, and I answer to no one but myself." "No family," something flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Not anymore. My parents died of cholera when I was 18. I had a younger sister, but she passed 2 years later trying to give birth to her first child. The baby did not make it either." "I am so sorry," Annabel said softly. Ethan shrugged, but she could see the pain behind the casual gesture. "It was a long time ago. What about you?" "Any family back east?" Annabel shook her head. "My parents died when I was 16. Samuel was a friend of my father's. He offered to marry me so I would have someone to take care of me. I know it was not a love match, but he was kind to me. He did not deserve what happened to him." "No one deserves that," Ethan agreed. "Do you know where you were headed before everything happened? California." Samuel had dreams of starting a ranch near Sacramento. He had saved for years to make it possible. Annabel looked down at her bowl, no longer hungry. I suppose that dream died with him. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ethan stood up and took the tray from her. You should rest more. Your body has been through hell and it needs time to recover. We can talk about what happens next when you are feeling stronger. But Annabel caught his wrist before he could leave. Thank you for saving my life, for everything. I know I am a stranger to you and you had no obligation to help me, but you did anyway. I will never forget that. Ethan looked down at her hand on his wrist, then back up at her face. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection neither of them could quite name. You would have done the same for me, he said simply. Over the next few days, Annabel regained her strength. Ethan was a patient host, never pressing her to talk about her plans or making her feel like a burden. He spent his days checking on his cattle, cutting firewood, and tending to the dozens of small tasks required to keep a homestead running in the middle of winter. Annabel helped where she could, grateful to have something to occupy her hands and mind. She discovered that Ethan was a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was worth listening to. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard more than once, making her laugh in a way she had not thought possible so soon after Samuel's death. He was also remarkably well-read for someone living alone in the wilderness, with a small shelf of books that included everything from Shakespeare to agricultural treatises. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Annabel finally voiced the question that had been weighing on her mind. I need to find work. I cannot impose on your hospitality forever, and I have no money to pay you back for everything you have done for me. Ethan looked up from the saddle he was mending. You are not imposing, and I do not want your money. But I cannot just stay here indefinitely, Annabel protested. It would not be proper. People would talk. What people? Ethan gestured around the empty cabin. The nearest neighbor is 10 miles away, and I doubt old Henry Morrison cares one bit about what goes on in my house. Besides, where would you go? The nearest town with any real opportunities is Cheyenne, and that is a 3-day ride in good weather. In winter, it could take a week or more. You do not have a horse, supplies, or money to get you there. So what are you suggesting? Annabel asked, though part of her already knew the answer and was not sure how she felt about it. Stay here through the winter. Help me around the place. When spring comes and the pass is clear, I will take you to Cheyenne myself and help you get situated. You can find work there, start over. He paused, his hand stilling on the leather. Unless you still want to go to California. I do not know what I want anymore, Annabel admitted. That was Samuel's dream, not mine. I just went along because being his wife was better than being alone and penniless in Missouri. Then maybe you should take the winter to figure out what your dream is, Ethan said. No obligations, no pressure. Just time to heal and decide what comes next. It was a generous offer, more than generous, and Annabel felt her throat tighten with emotion. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know anything about me. I could be a terrible person for all you know. Ethan smiled slightly. I am a pretty good judge of character, and I do not think you are a terrible person. You are just someone who got dealt a bad hand and is trying to figure out how to keep playing. I respect that. So Annabel stayed. The winter months passed in a rhythm that became comfortable and familiar. She woke each morning to find Ethan already up, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. They worked together throughout the day, their tasks punctuated by easy conversation or companionable silence. In the evenings, they read or talked or simply sat by the fire, content in each other's presence. Annabel learned that Ethan had come west from Pennsylvania after his sister died, needing to escape the memories that haunted every corner of his former life. He had worked as a ranch hand for several years, before saving enough money to file a homestead claim and start building his own place. The work was hard and often lonely, but he found a peace in it that had eluded him back east. In turn, Annabel told him about her childhood in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher who had instilled in her a love of learning even as poverty limited her opportunities. She spoke of her mother's gentle nature and her father's fierce intelligence, and how losing them had felt like losing her anchor in the world. She even told him about her marriage to Samuel, how she had been grateful for his protection even if she had never loved him the way a wife should love a husband. "You think that makes me a bad person?" she asked one night, curled up in the chair by the fire with a book forgotten in her lap. "That I married him knowing I did not love him?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I think it makes you a practical person. Love is a luxury not everyone can afford, especially women in your position. You did what you needed to do to survive, and there is no shame in that. But do you not think people should marry for love? In an ideal world, yes, but we do not live in an ideal world." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "My sister loved her husband with everything she had. Did not stop him from running off when she got pregnant, leaving her to face childbirth alone. Sometimes love is not enough." "That is a terribly cynical view," Annabel said softly. "Maybe, or maybe it is just realistic." Ethan turned to look at her, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "But I will say this. If I ever do marry, it will be because I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. Not for convenience, not for practicality, but because I have found someone who makes me want to be a better man than I am." The intensity of his gaze made Annabel's heart beat faster, and she looked away, suddenly flustered. "That is a lovely sentiment." "It is the truth," Ethan said simply, and went back to tending the fire. After that conversation, something shifted between them. Annabel found herself increasingly aware of Ethan's presence. The way his hands moved as he worked, the sound of his laugh, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable, and wondered what he was thinking. She told herself it was just gratitude she was feeling, appreciation for his kindness during the worst period of her life. But gratitude did not explain the flutter in her stomach when their hands accidentally touched, or the way she found herself taking extra care with her appearance even though there was no one to impress but him. It was not until a mild day in late February that things came to a head. The temperature had climbed above freezing for the first time in weeks, and Ethan suggested they take advantage of the weather to ride out and check on the cattle. He had an extra horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and Annabel had mentioned that she missed riding. They rode for hours through the snow-covered landscape, and Annabel reveled in the freedom of it. She had been cooped up in the cabin for nearly 2 months, and being outside in the crisp air with the sun on her face felt like a gift. Ethan led them to a high ridge that overlooked a valley where his cattle were wintering in a sheltered area with access to a spring that never froze. "It is beautiful," Annabel breathed, taking in the vast expanse of white punctuated by dark shapes of pine trees and the moving dots of cattle. "It is," Ethan agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was not looking at the view. He was looking at her. Their eyes met, and Annabel felt something electric pass between them. Ethan dismounted and came to help her down from Daisy, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her to the ground. He did not immediately step back, and she did not move away. They stood there, so close she could see the individual flecks of gold in his green eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. "Annabel," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something, but I do not want to make you uncomfortable or pressure you in any way. If you want me to stop, just say so." "Tell me," she whispered. "I care about you, more than I should, more than I have any right to. I know it has not been that long since you lost your husband, and I know you probably need time before you can even think about those kinds of feelings again. But I cannot keep pretending that I think of you as just a guest or a friend. You are more than that to me." Annabel's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "How much more?" "Everything more," Ethan said. "You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. When you laugh, it feels like sunshine breaking through clouds. When you are sad, I want to move heaven and earth to make you smile again. I have never felt this way about anyone, and it terrifies me because I know you might not feel the same way. But I had to tell you. I could not keep it inside anymore." Annabel reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I was supposed to be grieving," she said. "I was supposed to spend months or years mourning my husband before I could even think about another man. But the truth is, Ethan, I have been falling for you since the first night you saved my life. Maybe even since the first moment I looked into your eyes. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or loneliness, but it is not. It is real and it is terrifying, and I do not know what to do about it." "You do not have to do anything," Ethan said. "We can take this as slow as you need. We can wait until spring, until you have had time to properly mourn and figure out what you really want. I am not going anywhere." "But what if I do not want to wait?" Annabel asked. "What if I am tired of doing what I am supposed to do and following rules that were never made with people like me in mind? Samuel was a good man, but I did not love him as a wife should love a husband. I cared for him. I respected him. But this feeling I have for you is something entirely different. It is like waking up after years of sleepwalking." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Are you sure? I do not want you to have regrets." "I am sure," Annabel said, and she was. For the first time since her parents died, she felt like she was making a choice for herself, driven by her own desires rather than necessity or obligation. "Kiss me, Ethan." He did, and it was nothing like the chaste peck Samuel had occasionally bestowed on her. Ethan kissed her like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water, like she was precious and essential, and everything he had been searching for without knowing it. Annabel kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is too soon and probably crazy, but marry me anyway. Stay here with me, build a life with me. Let me spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you happy." Annabel laughed, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "You are right, it is too soon and probably crazy. Ask me again in a month." "I will ask you every day if that is what it takes," Ethan said, grinning. "You will not have to," Annabel promised. "1 month and then my answer will be yes." True to his word, Ethan proposed every single day for the next month. Sometimes it was serious, over breakfast with the morning light streaming through the windows. Sometimes it was playful, when they were doing chores and he would suddenly drop to one knee in the middle of mucking out the barn. Once, he even proposed in the middle of an argument about the best way to organize the pantry, which made them both dissolve into laughter and forget what they had been fighting about. When the month was up, Annabel woke to find Ethan kneeling beside the bed with a simple gold band in his hand. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I kept when I left Pennsylvania. I know it is not fancy, but it would mean the world to me if you would wear it." Annabel took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They rode to the nearest town the following week, a small settlement called Bear Creek about 20 miles north of Ethan's homestead. The preacher was a kind-faced man in his 60s who asked no questions about the speed of their courtship or Annabel's recent widowhood. He married them in a brief ceremony with the preacher's wife and the local shopkeeper as witnesses. And just like that, Annabel Kensington became Annabel Zimmerman. The ride back to the cabin felt different somehow. Annabel was hyper-aware of the ring on her finger, the way Ethan kept glancing at her with a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When they arrived home as the sun was setting, he dismounted and helped her down, then surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" She laughed. "Carrying my wife over the threshold," Ethan said. "It is tradition. This is not a threshold, this is a cabin in the middle of nowhere." "It is our cabin in the middle of nowhere," he corrected, pushing open the door with his shoulder, "and that makes all the difference." He set her down gently inside, then pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. "I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy," he murmured against her lips. "Every single day for the rest of our lives." "I know you will," Annabel said. "And I promise the same to you." Their first year of marriage flew by in a whirlwind of hard work and simple joys. Spring came, bringing with it the back-breaking labor of planting crops and tending to the cattle. Annabel proved to be a quick learner and a tireless worker, and Ethan found himself increasingly grateful for her partnership. Together, they were building something real and lasting. Summer was hot and dusty, but the crops grew well and the cattle fattened on the lush grass. They made the trip to Bear Creek once a month for supplies, and Annabel slowly began to make friends among the other ranch wives. She learned that Ethan was well respected in the community, known for his honesty and willingness to help neighbors in need. Fall brought the harvest and the hard work of preparing for another winter. But this time, Annabel was not facing it as a terrified stranger stumbling through a blizzard. She was facing it as a wife and partner, secure in the knowledge that she had found her place in the world. It was in early December, almost exactly a year after Ethan had found her frozen on his doorstep, that Annabel realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses for 2 months running, and there were other signs too subtle to ignore. She was not sure how she felt about it. Part of her was thrilled at the prospect of having a child with Ethan, but another part was terrified. She thought of Ethan's sister, dying in childbirth, and wondered if she was strong enough to survive what so many women did not. She decided to wait until she was certain before telling Ethan. But he noticed the change in her before she could work up the courage to speak. They were sitting by the fire one evening when he suddenly asked, "Are you feeling all right? You have been tired lately, and I noticed you could barely stand the smell of bacon this morning." Annabel looked up from her sewing, caught off guard. "I am fine. Why do you ask?" Ethan studied her face for a long moment, and she saw the exact second when realization dawned. His eyes went wide and his expression shifted through surprise, joy, and fear in rapid succession. "You are pregnant," he said, and it was not a question. There seemed no point in denying it. Annabel nodded, setting aside her sewing. "I think so, yes. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "How long? 2 months, maybe 3. It is hard to say for certain." "Are you happy about it?" he asked, and she could hear the vulnerability in his voice. "I am," Annabel said honestly, "but I am also scared. I know what happened to your sister, and I know that childbirth is dangerous. I cannot promise you that everything will be all right." Ethan's grip on her hands tightened. "We will make sure you have the best care possible. I will ride to Cheyenne if I have to and bring back a real doctor. I will not lose you, Annabel. I cannot." "You may not have a choice," she said gently. "Then we make our own choices," Ethan said fiercely. "We do everything we can to make sure you and the baby are healthy and strong. We do not take chances and we do not give up. Promise me." "I promise," Annabel said, touched by the intensity of his emotion. "We will face this together, whatever comes." Over the next months, Ethan was true to his word. He treated Annabel like she was made of spun glass, hovering constantly and trying to take over all the heavy work. At first, Annabel found it endearing, but as her pregnancy progressed and her belly swelled, she grew frustrated with his overprotectiveness. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she said one afternoon in late March, when Ethan tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work." "Not my wife," Ethan said stubbornly. "Not if I have anything to say about it." "Ethan Zimmerman, you are driving me absolutely crazy," Annabel said, but she was smiling. "I love you, but if you do not let me live my life, I am going to start hiding from you." "I just want to keep you safe," Ethan said. "I know," Annabel said, softening. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. "Feel that? The baby is kicking, strong and healthy, just like its father. We are going to be fine, both of us. You have to trust me." Ethan felt the flutter of movement beneath his palm, and his face transformed with wonder. "That is our child in there." "It is," Annabel agreed, "and this child is lucky to have a father who cares so much." True to his word, Ethan rode to Cheyenne in April and returned with a middle-aged doctor named Margaret Hensley, who had delivered hundreds of babies, and agreed to stay at the homestead as Annabel's due date approached. Dr. Hensley was a practical, no-nonsense woman who immediately put both Annabel and Ethan at ease with her calm competence. "You are healthy and strong," she told Annabel after a thorough examination. "The baby is positioned correctly, and I see no reason why this should not be a straightforward delivery. But I will stay nearby just to be safe, and if anything seems wrong, we will handle it." When Annabel went into labor on a warm June morning, Ethan nearly went to pieces. He paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal while Dr. Hensley and the neighbor woman she had brought to assist worked with Annabel inside. He could hear Annabel crying out in pain, and it took every ounce of his self-control not to burst through the door. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was actually about 8 hours, he heard a different sound. The thin, reedy wail of a newborn baby. The door opened, and Dr. Hensley appeared with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife did beautifully." "She is tired but fine." Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. "Can I see them?" "Of course. Go meet your son." Ethan entered the bedroom to find Annabel propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, and when Ethan approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal the smallest, most perfect face he had ever seen. "Meet your son," Annabel said softly. "I thought we could name him Edward after your father, if that is all right with you." Ethan could not speak past the lump in his throat. He reached out and gently touched the baby's impossibly small hand, and tiny fingers immediately wrapped around his thumb. In that moment, he fell completely and irrevocably in love for the second time in his life. "Edward," he managed finally. "Edward Zimmerman, it is perfect." Annabel smiled up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "We did it. We made a family." "We did," Ethan agreed, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you. For him, for you, for everything. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Annabel Zimmerman." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Annabel said. "My cowboy who opened his heart when I had nowhere else to go." The first months with Edward were both wonderful and exhausting. The baby had healthy lungs and was not shy about using them, especially in the middle of the night. Ethan and Annabel took turns walking the floor with him, singing lullabies and telling stories until he finally settled down to sleep. Despite the sleepless nights and constant demands, Ethan had never been happier. He loved watching Annabel with their son, the way she cradled him so gently and sang to him in a voice sweet as honey. He loved the feeling of holding Edward against his chest, feeling that tiny heartbeat, knowing that this small person was half him and half the woman he loved more than life itself. As Edward grew from infant to toddler, the homestead grew too. Ethan expanded the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. He increased his herd, and the cattle operation became profitable enough that they no longer had to worry about money. Annabel started a garden that supplied them with vegetables through the summer and fall, and she began teaching Edward his letters as soon as he was old enough to hold a pencil. When Edward was 3, Annabel discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less frightened and more excited. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and when she gave birth to a daughter they named Elena after Annabel's mother, it was with Dr. Hensley in attendance and Ethan by her side, holding her hand through every contraction. 2 years after Elena came another daughter, Emma, and then 2 years after that, a son they named Eric. With 4 children running around, the homestead was never quiet, but neither Ethan nor Annabel would have had it any other way. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, hard work and simple pleasures. The children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride and work alongside their parents. Edward showed an aptitude for working with animals and announced at age 12 that he wanted to expand the ranch when he grew up. Elena inherited her mother's love of learning and spent every spare moment reading. Emma was fearless and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Eric was the baby, sweet-natured and gentle, content to follow wherever his siblings led through it all. Ethan and Annabel's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course. What married couple did not? But they had learned to talk through their problems, to listen to each other, to remember that they were partners facing the world together. On winter evenings, when the children were asleep, and they sat by the fire as they had done so many years ago, Ethan would sometimes look at Annabel and marvel at how his life had turned out. If someone had told him, back when he was a lonely bachelor working his claim alone, that he would one day have a wife he adored and 4 beautiful children, he would have laughed at the impossibility of it. "What are you thinking about?" Annabel asked one such evening, catching his gaze. "About how lucky I am," Ethan said. "About how different my life would be if I had not heard you knocking on my door that night." "I was not knocking," Annabel said with a smile. "I was barely tapping. I am amazed you heard me at all." "I almost did not," Ethan admitted. "I was half asleep, and at first I thought the sound was just the wind. But something made me get up and check. Call it fate, call it luck, call it divine intervention. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." Annabel moved from her chair to sit beside him, curling against his side as naturally as breathing. "I used to wonder what my life would have been like if I had made different choices. If I had not married Samuel, if the wagon train had not been attacked, if I had frozen to death that night instead of finding your cabin. But I do not wonder anymore, because all of those things, as terrible as some of them were, led me to you, and I would not trade what we have for anything. Not even a life in California with a big ranch and no money worries." Ethan teased. "Not even that," Annabel said firmly. "Though I would not object to a bigger barn. That one is getting awfully crowded with Edward bringing home every stray animal he finds." Ethan laughed. "He has your soft heart. He has your stubbornness," Annabel countered. "And Elena has your intelligence, Emma has your spirit, and Eric has both our soft hearts," Ethan said. "We made pretty good children, Mrs. Zimmerman." "We did indeed, Mr. Zimmerman," Annabel agreed. As the children grew older, the homestead continued to prosper. Edward, now a young man of 18, had indeed expanded the cattle operation, showing a business acumen that impressed even the older ranchers in the area. Eleanor had married a schoolteacher and moved to Bear Creek, where she taught alongside her husband. Emma, at 16, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, much to Ethan's consternation and Annabel's amusement. Eric, at 14, was still finding his way but showed a talent for woodworking that suggested he might become a carpenter. One spring morning, Annabel woke to find Ethan already awake, watching her with an expression of such tenderness it took her breath away. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You realize we have been married for 20 years, Ethan said. 20 years ago today, we stood in front of that preacher in Bear Creek and promised to love each other for the rest of our lives." Annabel reached up and touched his face, noting the silver that now threaded through his dark hair, the lines that years of sun and laughter had etched around his eyes. She knew she bore her own marks of time, but when Ethan looked at her, she still felt like the young woman who had stumbled frozen to his door. 20 years, she marveled. "How did that happen?" "One day at a time," Ethan said. "One sunrise at a time, one season at a time. And I would do every single one of them over again without changing a thing." "Not even the time Edward accidentally set the barn on fire trying to smoke out a hornet's nest?" Annabel asked. "Well, maybe that one," Ethan conceded with a laugh. "But everything else, absolutely." They spent the day quietly, just the two of them, having sent the children to help Eleanor with a project at the schoolhouse. Ethan took Annabel riding to the ridge where he had first kissed her, where he had first asked her to marry him. The view was just as beautiful as she remembered, and when Ethan pulled her close, she felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt all those years ago. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a delicate silver locket on a chain. "I had this made in Cheyenne. Open it." Annabel opened the locket to find two tiny photographs inside. One was of her and Ethan on their wedding day, recreated from memory by a talented artist. The other showed their 4 children, taken the previous summer. "Ethan, it is beautiful," she breathed. "I wanted you to have something to remind you of what we built together," Ethan said as he fastened the chain around her neck. "Everything I am, everything I have, everything I have accomplished, it is all because you walked into my life that frozen night. You made me want to be better, do better. You gave me a reason to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day. I love you more now than I did 20 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Annabel felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "With everything I am, everything I have, everything I will ever be. You saved my life, Ethan, and then you gave me a reason to live it fully, without fear or regret. You are the best man I have ever known, and I am so grateful that I get to spend my life with you." They stood there on the ridge, holding each other as the wind whispered through the grass, and the sun shone down on the land they had built together. In the distance, they could see their homestead, the house Ethan had expanded over the years, the barns and outbuildings, the cattle grazing peacefully. It was a kingdom built on love and hard work, and it was theirs. As they grew older together, Ethan and Annabel watched their children marry and have children of their own. Edward took over most of the ranch operations, allowing Ethan to slow down and enjoy his grandchildren. Eleanor and her husband had 3 daughters who loved to visit the ranch and hear stories about the old days. Emma married her sweetheart and moved to a neighboring ranch, close enough to visit often. Eric became a master carpenter and built beautiful furniture that was sought after throughout the territory. Through it all, Ethan and Annabel remained each other's constant. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they loved, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Their hair turned silver, their faces grew lined, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love by a fireside on a winter night. One quiet evening in late autumn, when they were both in their 70s, Annabel suddenly turned to Ethan and said, "Do you remember what I was thinking that night I knocked on your door?" "What were you thinking?" Ethan asked, always happy to indulge her memories. "I was thinking that I had nothing left to lose, that I had lost everything that mattered, and death would almost be a relief." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "I had no idea that I was about to find everything I never knew I needed. You gave me back my life, Ethan. And then you filled it with more love and joy than I ever thought possible." "You did the same for me," Ethan said. "I was just going through the motions before you came, working, surviving, but not really living. You taught me how to live again, how to hope, how to love. Every day with you has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as their grandchildren played in the yard under the watchful eye of Edward's wife. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, and Annabel thought about the long, winding road that had brought her to this moment. All the pain and loss, all the fear and uncertainty, all of it had been worth it to end up here with this man, surrounded by the family they had built together. "No regrets?" Ethan asked softly, as if reading her mind. "Not a single one," Annabel said. "You—" "Only that I did not find you sooner," Ethan said. "But I suppose we found each other at exactly the right time, when we both needed it most." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Annabel leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. She thought about the young woman who had arrived at his door frozen and desperate, with nowhere else to turn. She thought about the cowboy who had opened his heart to a stranger and given her not just shelter but a home, not just survival but a life worth living. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she had never left his heart, just as he had never left hers. They had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children and built a legacy that would outlast them both. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm they always had. The ranch thrived under Edward's management, expanding far beyond what Ethan had originally envisioned. Eleanor's daughters grew into accomplished young women, one becoming a doctor, another a lawyer, and the third a writer whose stories of frontier life became popular throughout the country. Emma and her husband had 5 children who were as wild and free-spirited as their mother. Eric's furniture business flourished, and pieces he crafted were treasured as family heirlooms. Ethan and Annabel became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that gathered every year for holidays and special occasions. The homestead rang with laughter and music, filled with people who existed because 2 lonely souls had found each other on a frozen winter night so many years ago. On the morning of their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration that drew people from all over the territory. The barn had been decorated with ribbons and flowers, and tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by friends and neighbors. A small band played music, and even though Ethan's joints protested, he swept Annabel onto the makeshift dance floor and held her close as they moved to a slow waltz. 50 years, Annabel marveled, looking up at her husband's weathered face. "Half a century with you and it still does not feel like enough time." "We will just have to keep going then," Ethan said. 60 years, 70, 100 if we can manage it." "I would like that," Annabel said. Growing old with you has been the greatest adventure of my life." Their grandson, Edward's youngest son, approached shyly when the dance ended. He was 10 years old, with Ethan's green eyes and Annabel's gentle smile. "Grandpa Ethan, Grandma Annabel, can you tell us the story again, about how you met?" Ethan and Annabel exchanged a look, having told this story dozens of times over the years. But they never tired of it, because it was their story, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. They settled into chairs that had been set up for them, and their family gathered around, from the oldest grandchildren to the youngest great-grandchild, still a baby in her mother's arms. Ethan took Annabel's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 5 decades of practice. "It was the coldest winter I had ever seen," Ethan began, his voice still strong despite his years. "The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow was so thick you could not see 3 feet in front of your face. I was sitting by my fire, alone as always, when I heard the faintest sound at my door. I was dying," Annabel continued, her voice soft but clear. "I had been walking for days with no food, no shelter, and I had given up hope of surviving. But then I saw a light in the darkness, and I used the last of my strength to reach that door and knock on it. When I opened it, she fell right into my arms," Ethan said, smiling at the memory. "She was frozen solid, more ice than woman, and I thought for sure I was going to lose her." "But he did not give up on me," Annabel said. "He spent all night bringing me back from the edge of death. He wrapped me in blankets, warmed my frozen hands and feet, and gave me a reason to keep fighting when I had been ready to surrender." "And then she never left," Ethan said, his eyes twinkling. "Stayed right here through the winter, through the spring, and when I finally worked up the courage to ask her to marry me, she said yes." "Best decision I ever made," Annabel said. "Second best," Ethan corrected. "The best decision you ever made was not giving up that night. Everything else came from that choice to keep living." Their youngest great-grandchild, a boy of 6, raised his hand. "Were you scared, Grandma Annabel, when you were in the snow?" "Terrified," Annabel admitted. "But sometimes being scared is okay, as long as you do not let it stop you from doing what needs to be done. I was scared, but I kept walking. And because I did, I found your grandfather, I found my home." "What about you, Grandpa Ethan?" one of the teenage granddaughters asked. "Were you scared?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I was scared of being alone forever," he said finally. "I had built this homestead, claimed this land, but it felt empty because I had no one to share it with. When your grandmother arrived, I was scared I might lose her. And then when she agreed to marry me, I was scared I would not be a good enough husband, that I would disappoint her somehow. Fear is a part of life. What matters is what you do despite being afraid." "Did you always love each other?" another grandchild asked. "From the very beginning?" Ethan and Annabel looked at each other, and something passed between them that needed no words. "I think I started falling in love with her the moment I saw her," Ethan said. "But love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every day. I chose to love your grandmother when I took her in from the cold. I chose to love her when I asked her to stay. I chose to love her when I proposed, when we married, when times were hard and when times were good. And I have chosen to love her every single day since." "And I chose to love him right back," Annabel said. "Even when he was stubborn and overprotective, even when we disagreed, even when life was difficult. Love is not about finding a perfect person. It is about choosing to see the best in someone and helping them be the best version of themselves." The celebration continued long into the evening, with stories and laughter, and the kind of joy that can only come from a family bound together by genuine love and respect. As the party wound down and their children and grandchildren began the journey back to their own homes, Ethan and Annabel stood on their porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, Annabel turned to Ethan. "That was wonderful, but I am exhausted." "Me too," Ethan admitted. Who knew being celebrated could be so tiring? They made their way inside, moving with the careful deliberation of people who had lived long lives and earned their aches and pains. But when they settled into their bed, the same bed they had shared for 50 years, they fit together as naturally as always, Annabel's head on Ethan's chest, his arm around her shoulders. "Ethan," Annabel said sleepily, "thank you." "For what?" "For opening your door that night. For not turning me away. For giving me a life I never dared to dream of." "Thank you for knocking," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me even when I did not deserve it." "You always deserved it," Annabel murmured. "You still do." They drifted off to sleep, hearts beating in sync, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Ethan and Annabel spent more time on their porch, watching the world go by, entertaining the steady stream of family members who came to visit. They took pleasure in small things: the first flowers of spring, the taste of ripe tomatoes from the garden, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth of the sun on their faces. Ethan's health began to decline when he was 78, his heart growing weak. The doctor from Cheyenne came to examine him and told them both gently that Ethan had perhaps a year or two left if he was lucky. Ethan took the news with equanimity, but Annabel was devastated. "We knew this day would come eventually," Ethan said that night, holding her as she cried. "We have had 53 years together, Annabel. That is more than most people get. That is a gift." "It is not enough," Annabel said fiercely. "I want another 53 years. I want forever." "We have forever," Ethan said. "Whatever comes after this life, I will find you there too." This is not the end of our story, just the end of a chapter. Over the following months, Ethan grew weaker, but his spirit remained strong. He made sure all his affairs were in order, that Edward knew how to handle everything with the ranch, that his daughters and younger son knew how much he loved them. Most importantly, he spent as much time as possible with Annabel, reminiscing about their life together and making sure she knew how grateful he was for every moment. On a warm summer evening, with the windows open to let in the breeze and Annabel sitting beside him holding his hand, Ethan took his last breath. It was peaceful, quiet, just a gentle transition from being to not being. Annabel felt the moment his spirit left, felt the absence where he had always been present, and something inside her cracked. The funeral drew people from all over the territory. Ethan had been respected and loved, a pillar of the community who had always been fair in his dealings and generous with his time and resources. But while Annabel appreciated the kind words and sympathy, all she wanted was to have her husband back. The weeks after Ethan's death were the darkest of Annabel's life, darker even than those desperate days wandering through the blizzard. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the homestead to make sure she was not alone. But Annabel felt hollow, like she had lost the essential part of herself that made her who she was. It was her great-granddaughter Rose, Eleanor's granddaughter who had become a doctor, who finally broke through Annabel's grief. Rose was 25, bright and compassionate, and she sat with Annabel one evening and said, "Grandma Annabel, I know you are hurting, but Grandpa Ethan would not want you to give up. He spent his life making sure you lived fully. Do not dishonor that by just waiting to die." The words were harsh but true, and they struck something deep inside Annabel. Ethan had saved her life and then shown her how to live it. How could she repay that gift by surrendering to grief? So Annabel began to live again, not the same as before because part of her would always be missing, but purposefully nonetheless. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories and wisdom she had accumulated over her long life. She helped Edward's wife with the household management and taught her granddaughters how to garden. She wrote down the story of her and Ethan's life together so that future generations would know where they came from and what their ancestors had overcome. 2 years after Ethan's death, Annabel woke one morning feeling different. It was not pain exactly, but an awareness that her time was coming to an end. She was 80 years old, and she had lived a full and rich life. She was ready. She called her children to her, and they came immediately, sensing the urgency in the message. When they were all gathered around her bed, she smiled at each of them in turn. "I want you to know how proud I am of all of you," she said, her voice weaker than it had been but still clear. "You have grown into such wonderful people, and you have given me more joy than I ever thought possible. Your father would be so proud too." "Mama, do not talk like that," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to be fine." "My darling girl, we both know that is not true," Annabel said gently. "And that is all right. I have lived longer than I ever expected to, and I have been blessed beyond measure. I am not afraid." Edward, her firstborn, took her hand. "We will take care of everything, Mama. The ranch, the family, all of it. We will make sure your legacy lives on." "I know you will," Annabel said. "But my legacy is not just the ranch or the land. It is all of you. The love you show each other, the values you pass on to your children, the way you face life with courage and compassion. That is what your father and I built. That is what will last." She spent the day surrounded by her family, holding new babies and hugging grandchildren, sharing stories and laughter even as her strength slowly faded. As evening approached and the sun began to set, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Annabel felt a deep peace settle over her. "I can see him," she whispered, her eyes focused on something none of the others could see. "He is waiting for me, my cowboy." Emma leaned close. "What is he saying?" "Mama." Annabel smiled, and for a moment she looked young again, like the woman who had knocked on a cabin door 55 years ago and found her whole world waiting on the other side. "He is saying it is time to come home." With her children and grandchildren gathered around her, their love a tangible presence in the room, Annabel took one last breath and let it out slowly. Her eyes closed, the smile still on her face, and just like that, she was gone. They buried her next to Ethan on the ridge overlooking the valley, the place where they had shared their first kiss, and so many precious moments over the years. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and the dates of their lives with an inscription that read, "She arrived frozen with nowhere else. He opened his heart. Together they built forever." The ranch continued under Edward's stewardship, and then under his children's, and then their children after that. The homestead Ethan had started, and that he and Annabel had built together, became a thriving operation that supported dozens of family members and employed even more from the surrounding community. But more than the land or the cattle or the buildings, what truly lasted was the story. Every generation heard about the blizzard and the cowboy and the woman who had refused to give up. They heard about love that overcame impossible odds, about two people who had found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful from that unlikely beginning. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew Ethan and Annabel in life grew up understanding what real love looked like because of the example their ancestors had set. They learned that love was not just romance and passion, though it could be both those things. Love was also choice and commitment and showing up every single day, even when it was hard. Love was opening your heart to someone who had nowhere else to go and never expecting anything in return. Love was building a life together one moment at a time, one season at a time, one year at a time, until you had created something that would outlast you both. The cabin where it all began still stood, carefully preserved by the family as a reminder of where they came from. The door that Annabel had knocked on that frozen night was the same door, though the wood was weathered now, and the hinges had been replaced more than once. Sometimes, on winter evenings when the wind howled and the snow fell thick and fast, family members would gather in that cabin and tell the story again. And every time they did, it felt like Ethan and Annabel were there with them, their love a presence that could never truly fade. Because that was the thing about real love, the kind that Ethan and Annabel had shared. It did not die when the people who created it passed away. It lived on in the children they raised, the home they built, the example they set. It lived on in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every choice to love even when it would be easier to walk away. She had arrived frozen with nowhere else to go, a desperate woman at the end of her rope. He had opened his heart, a lonely cowboy who had almost given up on finding connection. And together, they had created something that would echo through generations, a love story for the ages that proved that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the darkest moments, and that one act of kindness can change the entire trajectory of not just one life but hundreds. Their story became a beacon for their descendants, a reminder that love was always worth fighting for, that second chances existed if you were brave enough to take them, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. The legacy they left was not measured in acres or cattle or money in the bank, though there was plenty of all those things. It was measured in the love their children showed each other, in the strength their grandchildren found in difficult times, in the way their great-grandchildren, and beyond approached life with open hearts and unwavering courage. And so the story of Ethan and Annabel Zimmerman lived on, not just as history, but as a living testament to what two people could build when they found each other at exactly the right moment. She had been frozen, lost, with nowhere else to turn. He had opened his heart and his home without hesitation. And in doing so, they had created something eternal, a love that would never truly die as long as there were people to remember it and carry its lessons forward into the future. The ranch that sprawled across the Wyoming Valley stood as a monument to their dedication and hard work. But the real monument was in the hearts of the people who called them ancestors, who looked back at their story and understood what it meant to truly love someone, to build a life together despite the odds, to create something lasting in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. Ethan and Annabel had done more than just survive. They had thrived, loved, built, and created a legacy that would endure long after the buildings crumbled and the land changed hands. Their love had become immortal, passed down through the generations like a precious heirloom, polished bright by the telling and retelling until it shone like a star in the darkness, guiding their descendants home.